Madam Eshe Sinir Leo Olu, G20 Sherpa for Turkey during Turkey's G20 presidency for 2015, members of the G20 Development Working Group, officials and participants from the Caribbean and from G20 countries and from countries beyond the Caribbean. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the inaugural Caribbean Region Dialogue with the G20 Development Working Group. On behalf of the Caribbean, it's my honor to congratulate Turkey on assuming the G20 presidency for 2015 and for the exuberance the authorities have shown in inclusive engagement, inclusive outreach, and inclusive development policy work for 2015. I also convey my thanks to Madam Sinir Liolu and the Turkish G20 Development Working Group team. The Central Bank of Trinidad and Tobago has closely followed the progress and efforts of the G20 Development Working Group since its inception in 2010. And we were delighted to propose and receive the concurrence of Turkey's Development Working Group team to hold this inaugural meeting between Caribbean developing countries and the Development Working Group. Our teams have worked closely together in the past few weeks to put this meeting together, illustrating the scope for and impact of stronger collaboration between the Caribbean region and the G20 Development Working Group. This inaugural meeting between Caribbean developing countries and the DWG takes place at an important juncture with the UN Financing for Development Conference, the post-2015 Development Agenda, and the UNFCCC COP21 meetings all taking place within the next few months. Decisions at these three seminal events will define the contours of the Sustainable Development Agenda for the Caribbean and other developing countries, and they will have to pursue and be guided by these outcomes for many years to come. Caribbean countries are deeply challenged in the pursuit of their sustainable development, growth, and poverty eradication goals. We are still relatively young nations with small voices on the global stage. Therefore, the chance to be heard by this powerful group is a rare moment that I hope will change the lives of millions of our Caribbean people. This first meeting presents an exclusive opportunity to exchange knowledge and to explore opportunities to deepen the Caribbean G20 relationship. This afternoon, I hope that we can adopt an open, informal, and free-flowing approach to our discussions. Our common goals are to maximize this first opportunity for dialogue, to share our diverse knowledge of development policy, and ultimately, through this process, to consider how the G20 DWG may be able to support Caribbean countries in pursuing our development goals. We have a brief, concise, and focused agenda. We will first hear from Madam Ambassador about the G20 Presidency's development policy priorities for 2015 and beyond. The DWG has had an ongoing program of development policy work since 2010 and has set important priorities for 2015. Understanding these will provide a first opportunity for Caribbean countries to gauge the breadth and scope of the DWG's work in recent years and will help focus our subsequent discussions on aspects of mutual priority. We will then move to consider the Caribbean blue economy. The Caribbean Sea is the second largest sea in the world and home to 1/10 of the world's coral reefs, which are attractions to almost 1/3 of the world's tourists. Our membership, our identity, and our sustenance is bound together by the Caribbean Sea, which represents an untapped opportunity for diversification, growth, development, regional collaboration, and ultimately transformation. So far, the DWG has not examined the potential of the blue economy, and this session will open the opportunity for a closer consideration of this theme. Our third and final session will discuss domestic resource mobilization. The Caribbean region has a strong interest in mobilizing resources for development beyond trade taxes to including a broader base of taxes on goods and services. We have made good progress in recent years in mobilizing domestic resources for development, but there is greater scope for further progress. The DWG has established a domestic resource mobilization program again since 2010. Consequently, there is an opportunity for our discussion to identify areas of common priority. The most notable of these is strengthening tax revenue. We will hear a summary presentation on progress made by Caribbean countries in strengthening and transforming the composition of tax revenue. And through our subsequent discussions, we will consider areas of common priority policy interests to strengthen progress with the domestic resource mobilization in the Caribbean region. To support our discussions, Minister Peter Phillips, Minister of Finance of Jamaica, will chair our session on the Caribbean blue economy. To support him in this task is Mr. Robert Owen Jones, Assistant Secretary of the G20 branch, Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade, Australia. And Governor Gobin Ganga, my fellow colleague governor of the Bank of Guyana, will chair our session on domestic resource mobilization. To support him will be Mr. Lucky Molefe, Minister Counselor of the South African Revenue Services. I would like to thank Minister Phillips, Governor Ganga, Mr. Owen Jones, and Mr. Molefe for providing this valuable role. And in concluding, to mark the significance of this first Caribbean G20 dialogue, we will issue a very brief statement of about a page, highlighting a few salient points of our discussion. We will read this short statement out at the end of the meeting with the intention of it being adopted promptly and by acclamation. I now turn to Madam President, Ambassador, to update you on the G20 presidency priorities for 2015.
Thank you very much, Mr. Governor, Mr. Javada Rambaran. In fact, first of all, for your very kind words about Turkish presidency and encouraging words. And you have used 3 times inclusiveness. In fact, this is one of the priority of the Turkish presidency. Distinguished ministers and governors, colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, I welcome you all here today to the first Caribbean Regional Dialogue with the G20 Presidency and the Development Working Group. On behalf of all participants, I would like to thank those who have helped to organize this event. I would like to especially express our appreciation to the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Trinidad Tobago, His Excellency Winston Dokeran, for starting this initiative. In fact, we owe this meeting to his proposal because he wrote to our Minister of Foreign Affairs with this proposal, starting this initiative, and our minister gave us a strong instruction to do it, to implement it immediately. We hope that this will be the first step towards a fruitful dialogue and cooperation between the G20 and CARICOM. In fact, as the G20 president for 2015, Turkey has a strong determination to have a clear agenda to strengthen dialogue and interaction between the G20 and LDCs, low-income developing countries. As you all know, since 2010, development has been at the core of the G20 agenda. Our Australian colleagues are here. In fact, they worked also very hard last year to make progress on the development agenda. In fact, over the years, our agenda has expanded and become more comprehensive, covering a broad range of topics, from assisting low-income developing countries in creating an enabling environment for infrastructure investments, on strengthening the capacity of their tax administration, to developing better skills for their human resources. This meeting will give us the opportunity, in fact, to better explain the G20 development agenda to the Caribbean countries, and also for us to have a better understanding of the development experience of the Caribbean region and the importance of the blue economy for the region. I will briefly touch upon Turkey's presidency priorities with a particular focus on our G20 development agenda. As you know, Turkey assumed the G20 presidency 1st of December last year. We are already 1/3 of our way through our presidency year, which will culminate in the Antalya summit on November between 15 and 16. We have an ambitious agenda, a very busy work plan, but we believe that we are already making good progress. You know that the G20's major objective is to work for achieving strong, sustainable, and balanced growth. We believe that growth also needs to be inclusive. Therefore, Turkish presidency announced inclusive and robust growth through collective action as its main priority. We have framed our priorities as the 3 I's of the Turkish presidency, namely implementation, inclusiveness, and investment for growth. We believe that implementing its commitments is a key for the credibility of the G20. G20 member countries have collectively committed themselves to policy measures, over 1,000 in total, which are estimated to lift collective G20 growth by additional 2.1% over the next 5 years, which is also expected to boost non-G20 GDP by over 0.5%. The IMF and OECD calculates that the implementation of these commitments can add an additional $2 trillion to the world economy, an output equivalent to the size of the Indian economy. In this respect, accountability, that is to say, holding ourselves accountable as the G20 countries to implement our growth strategies, will be crucial. The Turkish presidency will focus on developing a robust and credible accountability framework. Policy measures implemented by the G20 have a positive impact, not only in G20 countries, but also on the entire world economy, including low-income developing countries. Therefore, we think that ensuring the credibility of the G20 through implementing our commitments will have a positive spillover on global economy. Implementation in 2015 also encompasses a wide range of other deliverables, ranging from action plans on anti-corruption, energy efficiency, to beginning work on our collective target to reduce the gap between labor participation between female and male forced participation by 20% by 2025. Inclusiveness is also very high on our agenda. This isn't a new theme for the G20. In fact, G20 in its current form was forged in response to the global economic crisis. Members came to the mutual understanding that it was essential to bring together advanced and emerging economies as equal stakeholders in order to build a truly global economic governance platform. In retrospect, this inclusive approach has been one of the most important sources of the G20's success. The very essence of the G20 configuration is go beyond the tightly defined membership limits of other fora and engage a wider set of countries and stakeholders in truly global debates. That is one of the reasons why we are here today. Inclusiveness under the Turkish presidency targets the national and international level. At the national level, G20 countries must examine our domestic policies and business practices to ensure that they promote inclusive growth. We must tackle inequality to ensure that the benefit of growth and prosperity are shared by all segments of society. At the international level, we must ensure that our decisions and actions will benefit non-G20 countries and commit to building better global dialogues. The G20 represents 2/3 of the world population. We want to reach out to the other third, including your countries in the Caribbean. This is indeed a challenging agenda, but we need to be ambitious and aim high to make progress. That's why we are pursuing a number of inclusive outcomes across G20 agenda, from the economic participation of women, youth, and to tackling food losses and waste and energy access in G20 and non-G20 countries. In all work streams of the G20, we are highlighting linkages with LIDCs, underscoring the message that the G20 is not only concerned about its own interests, but strongly committed to ensure that its policies benefit the entire world economy. As a matter of fact, 2015, we all very much conscious about that, is a critical year for development. Our inclusiveness agenda needs to complement and support the UN's development agenda, in particular progress towards the Sustainable Development Goals in autumn. The G20 Development Working Group is focused on getting this right. It is prioritizing a number of work streams, many of which are directly relevant to the Caribbean experience. Domestic resource mobilization is one such an area. I am pleased that you will be focusing on this later in the day. The G20 work on strengthening international tax policy has moved on significantly in recent years. Now it is the time to be working with progressive regions and countries such as the Caribbean to strengthen domestic tax systems and mobilize revenues. Mobilizing domestic resource has become increasingly important for developing countries. It is potentially the biggest source of long-term financing for sustainable development. Supporting domestic resource mobilizations will also help strengthen fiscal institutions because stable and predictable revenue facilitates long-term fiscal planning and help ensure that resources are allocated to priority sectors and are translated into outcomes. Turkey's G20 presidency, mindful of the importance of the domestic resource mobilizations for developing countries, aims to develop a report on options for low-income countries for efficient and effective use of tax incentives for investment. We will also focus on capacity building and improvement for low-income countries in the field of domestic resource mobilizations. Ladies and gentlemen, investment for growth is another priority for the Turkish presidency. We are focused on efforts to help close the investment gap inside and outside of the G20. The emphasis is on quality investment, and the G20 countries have been asked to prepare national investment strategies before our leaders meet in November 2015. Globally, there is a large infrastructure investment gap both in advanced and developing countries, and also low-income countries. In fact, developing quality, reliable, sustainable, and resilient infrastructure has been identified as a sustainable development goal. We all know that the public sector cannot meet the global investment gap alone, which is estimated by the OECD at $70 trillion until 2030. There appears to be ample liquidity in the private sector to provide financing for these investments. A key challenge for policymakers is to put in place the necessary conditions so that long-term institutional investors increase their involvement in infrastructure investments. The Turkish presidency proposal for G20 countries to prepare concrete and ambitious national investment strategies to support their national growth strategies has received broad support from the membership. These strategies will include measures to attract long-term institutional investors, promote improved access to finance by the SMEs, improve the regulatory framework, improve efficiency of the public investment, and support alternative sources. The development of the Caribbean blue economy fits in well with this theme. In particular, the questions around quality investments, given your focus on delivering economic growth, community development, and environmental protection. I recognize that small island developing states, including Caribbean countries, are highly dependent on ocean and marine resources to grow their economies. Many coastal nations rely heavily on marine resources, not only to generate income, but also for other important needs, including food security, tourism, poverty reduction, and disaster risk mitigations. Turkish presidency is aware of the importance of this issue for the developing nations. We plan to organize the G20 agriculture ministers meetings and focus on food security challenges. The main themes of these meetings will be establishing sustainable food system and reducing food losses and waste. These are global issues and needs global response. I believe G20 focus on food security will support global efforts in this important field. We will organize the G20 Energy Ministers meetings, first time ever, and our main focus will be on access to energy. This field has a strong development dimension, not only because it is among the proposed SDGs, but also access to affordable and modern energy significantly contribute to enhance infrastructure, food production, and health systems. We are also planning to organize G20 tourism ministers meetings in September to underscore the importance of the tourism sector's employment generation capacity. We are planning to focus on the role of SMEs in tourism. We look forward to hearing the discussion in this area. I am sure that we can learn a lot from each other's approaches and at the same time promote future opportunities. This is also an important year for climate change. The presidency believes it is important for the G20 to formulate a strong political message to support the UN process. Overall, the Turkish presidency hopes G20 development agenda can become more than the sum of its parts to deliver inclusive and robust global growth. But the G20 will not achieve this by working alone. We need to work collectively. That is why we are prioritizing partnership with the Caribbean and other regional groups and low-income developing countries. That's why we are here today to listen and share experiences on development and other issues. We look forward to fruitful and constructive discussion in our meeting today, and I hope we can continue our dialogue beyond this meeting. Thank you very much.